And my question is this. It's a little long-winded question, but so everything that happened in Ferguson, they say, right? So this led to some protests there at the school because, these are people that grew up in that area as well. And now they're students here. And I'm curious if, so they're saying there's this systemic racism on campus. And again, I don't have this university experience, so I don't really know, but I did see some isolated incidents. So, okay, that actually happened, but was there actually something really there? And do you really feel that, everything that happened with Ferguson, had that not maybe happened, would have brought that attention to the school and, your decision to step down, which I felt a little sad about that. I just thought, God, that stinks, like that you have to step down. And, I just feel like you got caught up in something, this whirlwind of stuff. And just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I was basically collateral damage, if you want to call it that. The problem is basically that was a pretty local story in Missouri until the football team decided to publicly announce their intention to strike unless my boss stepped down.
Yeah.
And he did so within a couple of days of that. So that's what really happened. My departure from the chancellorship was not connected to the racial discussions on campus at the time directly at all. That's something you would know if you were locally there.
Sure.
See that in the national media and the things you probably saw when you Googled my name out there. But what really, I'll say this, Ferguson was a catalyst, and it wasn't just Ferguson itself. What was more telling was the day in which the grand jury decision not to indict the police officer that shot Michael Brown, when that was announced, that really was the beginning, if you will, of much conversation and much anxiety on the campus in Columbia, Missouri, which is about a couple hours drive from St. Louis and Ferguson where it happened. So I would say Ferguson was a catalyst. There were some students, not many, but some students at the campus from Ferguson, many more new people from Ferguson. And there were some, and Ferguson happened during the summer. So we had a much lower population of students there. The grand jury announcement happened the Monday of Thanksgiving week when students were already gone. It was a total week off for them. And so they weren't there. So what we arranged was a series of conversations with our students week following the announcement in November of 2014 of the grand jury results. And that's really what started a whole series of conversations and meetings all through the rest of that year and the first half of 2015. The real sort of national news came about because of a man named Jonathan Butler, who organized a small group of students called Concerned Student 1950. And they presented me and others with a list of demands, requirements that they wanted us to meet. And we met often, we talked a lot, we worked through those things they had listed and talked about what could be done, what couldn't be done. And the only thing that I differed with them on basically was the time frame. For example, one demand was that we have 10% of the faculty being African American. Well, in some departments it was more than that, in many it was much less than that, and some it was zero. The problem is to get a PhD in an area where you can be qualified to be a faculty member at a university like that takes a while. If you ask the question, how many African Americans have a PhD in a given year in physics or chemistry, the answer is not very many. And by the way, many universities want them. And so the ability to grow your faculty quickly just wasn't there in a lot of areas. And they understood that, but of course, students want things to change during their lifetime, their 4 years campus, and that was what the problem was. The other issue we really couldn't address immediately was curriculum. They wanted courses in place that would help educate all students about their backgrounds and their histories and their concerns. And I had no real issue with that, but the faculty owned the curriculum, not the chancellor. So I couldn't do that. But what happened is they turned their attention from me to my boss, the system head, and ultimately he was the focus for their attention, and ultimately he was forced to resign. and I left for really other reasons, if you want to dig into it more deeply than that. But nonetheless, it was timing that made that appear to be the case, and that's what it is. No regrets about that. I did what I could do.
Yeah.
In the circumstances. At some point, I wasn't allowed to anymore, and that's where things went south. Really, is when the person above me, who was less experienced in university settings than I was, just didn't really know how to handle that sort of situation. But again, the catalyst was Ferguson in a way back in 2014. A year later, roughly, we had this problem at Mizzou with the football team, which got national attention, and otherwise it had been a local story that you probably wouldn't have heard about much.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, it's absolutely believable that the lens would be blurred from local to national, right? The news that you get, there's always more to the story than what you get nationally, which doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah, it sounds like definitely just collateral damage, which stinks. I'm glad some changes were made, hopefully positive changes, but yeah.
Well, there were some changes made, and again, if you go there today, you'd find that the students I dealt with are all gone.
Yeah.
Who are there today who are concerned about the current circumstance, have some of the same issues that we had back in 2014 and 2015. We'll see what happens. I don't know that much will change necessarily very quickly. We made some changes where we could make changes rapidly back in my time. I think there's been some progress being made, but I'd be very surprised if things were all totally perfect today compared to what they were back when I was there. I'd be very surprised about that. It's not something easy. As I told people many times, you can do many things, but you can't change hearts. And that's what it comes down to, is changing hearts. I think that, given long periods of time, this can happen. But you don't really mandate that your heart be changed. And that's what difficulties exist when you're trying to make changes rapidly in a place like Missouri or Texas A&M or anywhere else in the world for that matter.
Sure. No, absolutely. I'm sure you've thought about this, several times and probably had conversations, but in retrospect, looking back on that situation, would you do something differently? Would you have done something differently?
Not I. I mean, really, I did what I thought was right. If you talk to the students who were there at the time, I think they would agree that I was open to conversations with them, open to addressing things that could be dealt with level, and I try to get others engaged with that process as well as appropriate. What really took place was the person who was my immediate superior deciding that he wanted to be in charge. He could do better than me, and he said, basically step aside, and I did. And so that's where we were. And there's plenty of things out there. There's an interesting YouTube you can find well over 1 million views of him being confronted by the students outside of a venue in Kansas City after he'd gone to a fundraiser there. And he was asked by these students to define systemic racism. And he didn't do too well with that. You can judge for yourself. So my point is, he wasn't a bad person exactly. He just didn't know what he was doing. He was an IBM sales executive during much of his career. He had no graduate education at all, and so he was put in a place where he was managing a 4-campus system, and that wasn't a good place for him to be, probably.
Yeah, that sounds, sometimes you're just like you said, over your head. You just don't, not a bad person, just doesn't have experience with that. Who do you think, how do you find that right person as a university? It's got to be
very difficult these days. If you look at the press, you'll find that virtually every university president is criticized pretty often. Michigan's president is in deep doo-doo right now, for example. It's in the news yesterday and today. It's a very difficult place to be. Understand this, that the expectations are so different now than they once were.
Sure.
The of smartphones that capture audio and video it's huge. And so consequently, every single thing you say, do, is captured potentially by someone else. And that can either be put out like it is, or it can be manipulated a bit to show only parts of what happened, and that's okay. I mean, I don't object to that, but it gives you a different kind of world to interact with and deal with than people had even just a decade ago. So things have changed radically over that time. If you look at my background, you'll find that I'm one of the few university leaders who actually embrace social media. And that was, a mixed blessing. I had hacked a few times, things like that. It got me in some hot water, but that's what it's about. I use that, though, very deliberately as a way to keep track of what was going on in the minds of my students. I could spend a couple hours a day on the timeline and see what was happening on the campus in ways that nobody else in administration did. I probably dialogued with at least 100 students a day individually through DMs and other means in social media to answer questions, provide them with some feedback on issues they had. But I also listened a lot that way. I spent a couple hours a day, every day, just looking at what students were saying about their campus, their university. And that was very telling, very interesting. You don't get that kind of honest, unfiltered sort of feedback any other way. If they come to the office, are going to be filtering somewhat what they say to you. Even those who are there to protest are going to be filtering what they say to you. But when they put it on social media, it's usually pretty raw. And when you look at that, you can really learn a lot about what's in the minds of these students pretty efficiently. I did that here at Texas A&M. I did that at Missouri. And that's really how I interacted with the students a lot. It's very difficult for a university leader at a place as big as A&M or Missouri to be able to really get to know students well. It's a big place, so much to do. My days were 14, 15 hours long, and that was 7 days a week. I mean, there was just no break for years and years and years. And that kind of schedule, you have a hard time really being reflective and learning much. And so I used a couple hours a day just to learn privately about what was going on the campus there and use that to make decisions with, to actually affect change in many cases. And that's something that's pretty rare even today.